Saturday, December 22nd, 2018, and it is 1:50 in the afternoon. We are going to take a look at the next in our series of Christmas legends, myths, and stories, and today we're looking at Saturnalia. And we are going to hop, skip, and jump through several websites because each of the websites focused specifically on one thing, and I couldn't get a concise overview, not taking anything away from the scholarship of any of these websites. We're just trying to get an overview of how we got to where we are in modern Christmas observance. So from the blog on Blogspot, Pastoral Meanderings, the Bible abounds in symbolic language of Jesus represented as light, a metaphor found for the divine in every other major religion as well. The choice of December 25th also worked for the early Christians because it corresponded with two Roman celebrations centered on the winter solstice. Saturnalia, an ancient Roman celebration that originated 2 centuries before Christ, began on December 17th and ended on the 23rd. Saturnalia was the celebration of the god Saturn and was marked by feasts, merriment, the hanging of evergreen cuttings, the lighting of candles, and of gift-giving. How would the people of Rhode Island have reacted if the governor had called the tree a Saturnalia tree? Many Romans in the 4th century also celebrated the birth of the sun, S-U-N god, Sol Invictus, on December 25th, marking the occasion with a festival. As Christianity began to spread throughout the world, throughout the Roman Empire, the Christian tradition of Christmas naturally absorbed the elements of these popular pagan celebrations. If you are like me, the author of this piece, and think the opposite, then William T. has done a good job of laying out the case. The idea that the date was taken from pagans goes back to 2 scholars from the late 17th century and early 18th centuries. Paul Ernst Jablonski, a German Protestant, wished to show that the celebration of Christ's birth on December 25th was one of the many paganizations of Christianity that the Church of the 4th century embraced, as one of many degenerations that transformed pure apostolic Christianity into Catholicism with a capital C, in other words, Roman Catholic Catholicism. Dom Jean Hardouin, a Benedictine monk, tried to show that the Catholic Church adopted pagan festivals for Christian purposes without paganizing the gospel. In the Julian calendar created in 45 BC under Julius Caesar, the winter solstice fell on December 25th, and it therefore seemed obvious to Jablonski and Hardouin that the day must have had a pagan significance before it had a Christian one. But in fact, the date had no religious significance in the Roman pagan festival calendar before Aurelian's time, nor did the cult of the sun play a prominent role in Rome before him. There were 2 temples of the sun in Rome, and this is S-U-N, not S-O-N. One of which, maintained by the clan into which Aurelian was born or adopted, celebrated its dedication festival on August 9th, the other of which celebrated its dedication festival on August 28th. But both of these cults fell into neglect in the 2nd century when the Eastern cults of the S-U-N sun, such as Mithraism, began to win a following in Rome, and in any case, none of these cults, old or new, had festivals associated with solstices or equinoxes. And we're going to move on and look at another site by sott.net, Saturnalia, the Roman roots of Christmas. And this talks specifically about Saturnalia. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever your reason for the season, most of the December holidays tradition that we celebrate today can be traced back to the ancient Roman holiday of Saturnalia, with a healthy dose of inspiration also coming from the Vikings. From tree decorations, wreaths, ornaments, boughs of holly, caroling, albeit with more clothes and less rude songs these days, gift-giving, and even gingerbread men, most of what we identify as Christmas has roots going back thousands of years. So what was Saturnalia? The fact is, the Romans loved festivals, and officially, Saturnalia commemorated the winter solstice as well as honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture, wealth, and liberation. Most Roman holidays were never confined to a single day, and Saturnalia was a week-long celebration lasting from the 17th to either the 23rd or 24th of December. Described by the Latin poet Catullus as the best of days, it was the most popular holiday of the Roman calendar, attested by the fact that many of its traditions still survive today. The exact date of origin is unknown, though references to the holiday are made as early as the 4th century BC. Like other holidays and festivals at its core, Saturnalia was religious observant, albeit most of the religious aspects were only observed on the first day. Saturnalia began on December 17th at the Temple of Saturn on Capitoline Hill. The emperor, consuls, prominent senators, as well as members of the nobility would be in attendance. Much of the public was also gathered around to watch and wait for the commencement of festivities. The feet of the statue of Saturn were wrapped in woolen strips which were removed for the festival. Fertility rituals and sacrifices were made, after which either the emperor or consuls would turn to the crowd and shout, "Yo, Saturnalia!" The celebration could now begin. Yo, Saturnalia, and the world turned upside down. Much like Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, the Romans had their own greeting for the season. The first word was pronounced either io or yo, with both being deemed technically correct, potato, potato, tomato, tomato. It could mean just about anything, and often shouted by revelers in the midst of committing acts of naughtiness. During Saturnalia, courts were suspended, as were many laws. Roles were also famously reversed, with slaves becoming masters and their masters having to serve them. The extent of this varied from house to house. It was most likely that while servants did have their own formal banquet with the masters serving them, the food was already prepared, likely by the servants. Not all emperors were enthusiastic about the week of mischief. Rather stoic Augustus attempted to have Saturnalia reduced to a single day. Even the notorious party animal Caligula tried to reduce celebrations to 3 days. Because Saturnalia was so universally popular, neither of these attempts met with any sort of success. In the end, both Augustus and Caligula were obliged to yield to the will of the people. And that is Caesar Augustus, sometimes called the Antichrist. Saturnalia traditions. The week of naughtiness saw a number of traditions, many of which still carry on to this day. These include, but are not limited to, the Saturnalia tree, wreath, and boughs of holly. The modern Christmas tree has origins in both Norse and Roman traditions. While Norsemen used evergreens as they were viewed as a symbol of eternal life, the Romans used just about any tree that was growing where they lived. They also did not chop down the trees and place them in their homes. That came from the Germans during the Renaissance and has been attributed to Martin Luther. However, in our Christian Symbols broadcast, we disproved that Martin Luther had anything to do with it. Being the winter solstice was about the rebirth of the sun, S-U-N, the sun god Sol Invictus got his share of attention as well. Many of the ornaments decorating, I want you to see these ornaments. Many of the ornaments decorating the Saturnalia trees were in the shapes of stars or suns. Images of the double-faced god Janus were also popular, as well as were gold and silver-colored orbs, much like today. Food, in particular cookies and shaped biscuits, were also used to decorate trees. These were often shaped like suns, moons, children as a sign of fertility, or animals. So yes, the Christmas gingerbread man also has Saturnalia origins, as I might add, there may be a connection to baby-shaped, baby-like, rosy-cheeked angels, otherwise known as cherubs, which is not how the Bible describes them at all. And while trees remained outdoors, people decorated their homes with lots of greenery, symbols of life, fertility, and the harvest. Streamers of red and gold were often interlaced within these. Wreaths were also hung from doorways and public buildings. Of interesting note, the hanging of mistletoe is actually a Nordic tradition that dates back to the ancient Scandinavia and myth of Baldur. The burning of the Yule log is also Nordic, and the term Yuletide, which dates back to ancient Germanic paganism. People also decorated themselves with lots of greenery, as well as copious amounts of costume jewelry. Laurel crowns were often worn by both men and women alike. Such dress and spectacle often rolled into the next ancient tradition, the singing of carols. We're going to stop here and move on to the description of where this came from in terms of the Christian church, in terms of the Catholic or small c church universal. And we want to pick up, this is an article by Milt Timmons, aka Lee Carter, Winter Solstice and the Origins of Christmas. And we want to pick up where they talk about solstice and equinox. Okay, finally, wait a minute. I'll go a little bit further down. The major festival of the year in ancient Rome was called Saturnalia, and it is centered on the winter solstice. When the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar, was first devised, the solstice fell on December 25th. But the Julian calendar had an error of 11 minutes. The year is actually 365 days, 11 hours, or 6 hours and 11 minutes and a few seconds. So by the 3rd century CE, or Common Era, or AD, after death, the solstice had crept backwards to approximately December 23rd. At this time, Emperor Aurelian established an official holiday called Sol Invictus. or Sol Invicti, meaning unconquered sun, S-U-N, in honor of the Syrian god Sol, which was an S-U-N god, and also in honor of himself, since the emperors were regarded as the divine incarnation of Apollo. This is the same Apollo that appears in the Roman pantheon. This holiday was held on December 24th and 25th, and it more or less established December 25th as the official solstice. All other religions that worshipped S-U-N gods were also accepted December 25th as a fixed date for their celebrations. And the major festivals of the Egyptian Earth Mother Isis were held on December 25th, January 6th, and March 5th. The earliest Christians assumed that Christ was born and was resurrected on the same day, March 25th, which was assumed to be the vernal equinox. Later Christians celebrated the birth of Christ on January 6th, along with the festival of Isis. But the 4th century, in other words, the 300s AD, many Christians were referring to December 25th as the unconquered S-O-N in defiance of the emperor, and January 6th was then called Epiphany, where either the Magi were supposed to have visited Christ, or Christ was baptized, or maybe both. In 325 CE, or AD, which is when the Catholic Church, with a capital C, was officially organized, it decreed that the resurrection of Christ was determined by the vernal equinox, which is still celebrated today as Easter, named after the goddess of spring. In 350, Pope Julius I decreed that the Nativity should be celebrated the same day as all other S-U-N gods, namely December 25th. But many churches did not want to be associated with the pagan religions, and to this day the Eastern Orthodox Church celebrates the birth of Christ on January 7th, the day after Epiphany. New Year's has been celebrated every time of the year by various cultures. Months have varied in number and length, and weeks have varied from 4 days to 10 days in different cultures. In the 4th century, which is still the 350s AD, Emperor Constantine established our 7-day week based on the Jewish tradition. In the 6th century, Pope John counted backwards to the presumed date of Christ's birth, calculated from the reign of Pontius Pilate, and renumbered all the years in history as BC and AD. The year 753 AUC, or Ab Urbe Condita, meaning after the foundation of Rome, was then called 1 AD. BC and AD are now being replaced, at least by secularists, as BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, of the Common Era. Throughout the early Middle Ages, most of Europe disregarded Roman practices and continued to start the year with the equinox, March 25th. England, however, retained the practice of starting the year on the solstice, December 25th. By 1582, the 11-minute error in the Julian calendar had thrown the year 10 days out of sync with the sun, S-U-N, which was very upsetting to the Catholic Church, since the calendar determined all of their feast days. And this is the organized Catholic Church with a capital C, not the Universal Church, the Universal Apostolic Church, with a small c. Catholic means universal. At the same time, the Pope was the most powerful person in the world. So Pope Gregory had the authority to establish his Gregorian calendar. He deleted 10 days from that year, which pushed the solstice back to December 22nd, where it had been when the Catholic Church was founded in 325 AD. But by then, the connections with Christmas had long since been forgotten, so it remained on December 25th. Then Gregory modified the rule about how often leap year must occur so that the calendar wouldn't drift out of sync again. The Gregorian calendar also retained the Italian tradition of January 1st as New Year's Day. England and America finally accepted the Gregorian calendar in 1752. The Christian calendar, however, is not the only one. There is a Chinese calendar dated from the foundation of the Qin dynasty. There is a Jewish calendar dated from the creation of the earth according to biblical accounts. There is the Muslim calendar dated from the time Muhammad left the city of Mecca. And future calendars may well be dated from the time we first set foot on the moon. Let's move on to a discussion of Yule. And this is by the website Witches of the Craft. And this is a description of the northern winter solstice traditions. Merry Yuletide, or Yule winter solstice. Yuletide is Teutonic and Alban Arthon is Caledoni. December 20th through 23rd, Northern Hemisphere, June 20th through 23rd, Southern Hemisphere. This Sabbath, and I have to stop right here, Sabbath is a Hebrew word, but it is not in this context referring to Shabbat, the Hebrew day of rest beginning on Friday night at sundown and ending on Saturday night at sundown. This is another use of the Hebrew word. The Sabbath represents the birth of light, or the rebirth of light. Here on the longest night of the year, the goddess gives birth to the Sun god, and hope for new light is reborn. Yule is the time of awakening to new goals and leaving old regrets behind. Yule coincides closely with the Christian Christmas celebration. Christmas was once a movable feast celebrated many different times during the year. The choice of December 25th was made by Pope Julius I in the 4th century AD because this coincided with the pagan rituals of winter solstice or returning of the Sun. The intent was to replace the pagan celebrations with the Christian one. The Christian tradition of Christmas tree had its origins in the pagan Yule celebration. Pagan families would bring a live tree into the home so the wood spirits would have a place to keep warm during the cold winter. Bells were hung on the limbs so you could tell when a spirit was present. Food and treats were hung on the branches for the spirits to eat, and a 5-pointed star, the pentagram, symbol of the 5 elements, was placed atop the tree. The colors of the season, red and green, are also of pagan origin, as is the custom of exchanging gifts. A solar festival, the reindeer stag, is also a reminder of the horned god. You will find that many traditional Christmas decorations have some type of pagan ancestry or significance that can be added to your Yule holiday. Yule is celebrated by fire and the use of a Yule log. Many enjoy the practice of lighting the Yule log. If you choose to burn one, select a proper log of oak or pine, never elder. carve or chalk upon it a figure of the sun, a rayed disk, or of the horned god, a horned circle. Set it alight in the fireplace at dusk on Yule. This is a graphic representation of the rebirth of the god within the sacred fire of the mother goddess. As the log burns, visualize the sun shining within it and think of the coming warmer days. Let's skip down. Most pagan religions are polytheistic, honoring both male and female deities, which are seen by some as two aspects of one non-gendered god, by others as two separate and complementing beings, and by others as entire pantheons of gods and goddesses. It is common for the male gods to be represented in the sun, the stars, in the summer grain, and in the wild animals and places of the earth. The stag is a powerful representation of the male god, who is often called the horned god. The goddess is most often represented in the earth as a planet, the moon, the oceans, and in the domesticated animals and cultivated areas of the earth, referencing back to fertility. In many pagan traditions, the winter solstice symbolizes the rebirth of the sun god from his mother, the earth goddess. The winter solstice is only one of 8 seasonal holidays celebrated by modern pagans. And we are not going to go through this website, but it is the home of the Communio Sanctorum podcast by Lance RALSTON. And this podcast looks at the whole of church history, from the time the disciples were handing off to the apostles were handing off to the first generation of their disciples, down through at least the Reformation is what I remember. I don't know if he went farther than that, but he documents a lot of the universal church's history during the apostolic era, pre-Catholic Church with a capital C, which, as we've just discussed, was not organized and formalized until 325 AD. So 325 years after the death of Christ, according to the BC AD references in dating. So in modern terms, it would be 325 CE. And it wasn't until almost 25 years later that Constantine recognized Christianity as an official state religion, keeping in mind that Constantine was the eastern part of the Roman Empire's ruler at the time, and it was the influence of his mother Helen, who, along with his vision of a cross in the sky and the words, "In this sign conquer," paraphrased, it wasn't until these events did he recognize Christianity. All right, let's return to the desk. So far in our series looking at the Christmas season, we have looked at the origins of the Christmas tree, the seasonal symbols. In another broadcast, we've also looked at the time of birth in yesterday's broadcast, and today the roots of where the church created Christmas from Saturnalia and Yule celebration from the south and north, respectively. Tomorrow we will look at some of the prophetic scriptures that point to the birth of Christ. And then finally, we will bring you the story of the birth of Christ from the Synoptic Gospels. For me and the Shepherd, we hope that you are enjoying this series on the roots, legends, myths, and stories of Christmas. We hope you are blessed and enjoying your weekend until we see you again.